Hi, welcome. It's Willie Cutter Studio Q&A, and this is January's questions for February. Okay, so I put in a little sheepy thing, as you all know, and we'll do this once a month, roughly after I've done the Storyteller Bats, and it will fall on the following week after the last Storyteller Bat video. Anyway, so what I'm going to be talking about today is a selection of questions. I think I've got 8 in total, and I will say people's names, so not full names, just your first name. If you don't want that to happen, please let me know, but I will be doing this as a rule. And you probably noticed on the videos, though I forgot to do it the other day, that at the end of the Patreon videos, I will be putting down the first names of every member that support this platform and my YouTube videos, because that's what you're doing, and it's what everybody on the Patreon community do. It's a thanks and appreciation of doing that. Okay, so that's what will be going on from now on, if anyone's got any questions about that, if you've noticed. Okay, so the first question for January February 2024 is from Alison. Is there any difference dyeing yarn to locks and top, etc.? Yes, there is. Preparation is the main key. Okay, so I've written down my notes. So if you see me looking down, it's just because I'm just trying to keep myself place of where I've come from. If so, what's the difference? So well, with dyeing locks, so if you've got wool locks and you've bought them from somebody from Etsy or from a website, and they've said that they've been washed and everything else. I've bought locks from people from Etsy, and they said that they've been washed, but they've been suinated. I've never really liked them. I always find that they're still quite sticky. Hence, I ended up doing my own, because I like the method in which I use. I don't use the Suinate method, which is the cold water outside in a box and let it do nature's thing. I really don't like doing that technique at all. I don't always get perfect results every single time. So there's videos on my YouTube channel that you can see on how I prepare my locks. I can send you the links for them if you want. But what I find with dyeing them from me washing them is you need to obviously make sure that it's been scoured properly, that you've got no lanolin left on your fibres, okay, on your wool staple length, on your staple length, on your locks. God, Joe, you can tell it's Sunday. I've had 2 cups of coffee, just been off the phone to my eldest lad, and my head's all over the place. Right, anyway. So dyeing locks, you need to obviously make sure that it's been scoured, as the lanolin can actually reflect the saturation of the dye. So it can actually act as a bit of a barrier, okay? It can become maybe paler in comparison to areas of the locks that don't have any lanolin still sat on the locks, and it can get actually into the staple of the fibre itself, into those little nooks and crannies, because they're not just straight. As we all know, the follicles of hair and wool have these like jagged edges, so the dye needs to penetrate into them. So with the lanolin, I find that it actually blocks that and stops it from getting in. So it will dye, but you'll not always get a perfect bold colour if that's what you're looking for. And then actually, and I'll say this now, depending on the type of breed of wool locks that you're dyeing, can actually reflect the type of colour that you're going to get. Blue-faced Leicester Irish find always looks really dusky. Teeswater and Wensleydale, I would say, are the best locks for dyeing if you want really bold, true colours. They're the best ones, I feel. They're the ones that I use on a regular basis, okay? What's the other one that I've used now and again? Gotland dyes up. Not too bad if you want to use Gotland. Anyway, I'm diverging. So you want to make sure that you've scoured the lanolin off as much as possible. And by dyeing, the wool locks varies every time and cannot predict the same colour dye batch, even if you use the same method. So if you use the same amount of dye stock solution, the same amount of pigment that's gone in there, the same amount of citric acid, depending on the fleeces that you use, or different parts of the fleece sometimes can take dyeing at a different rate as well. You're not always, if you want to do a repeat dye lot, then you're not always guaranteed of it happening, and it's just because it's your home dyeing, okay? It's not an industrial scale, you're doing it from home, so your results are always going to be a little bit unpredictable. But you can get really unique effects with dyeing locks. The tips may be naturally bleached or darkened if it's a white fleece or a cream fleece, so that can give you a different look on the dye. Sometimes I find with some locks, the dye doesn't want to penetrate that area that's been sun bleached. It'll always have a yellowy tinge to it. I think getting away with that, I would dye them with a darker colour, especially if you're going to use different colours in there. If you're doing a lighter colour on there, like a yellow or a blue, it will send it like a greeny sort of colour with the bleached yellow tips on the ends of the locks, just to keep that in mind. But that might be the look you're looking for. Maybe naturally, the lock will take different saturation compared to the tip end. So if you've got the tips on the wool, but the rest of it's a lovely creamy colour, then you may find that you'll see a different colourway come through, but it can give you a really lovely effect. Okay, now to override this, you could actually open up the locks and card them, flick card them, English combs, and even out the balance of the colourways that you've ended up with this, and then card it up, and then they'll all blend into each other, just to give it an equal what's the word I've used, an equal amount of colouring throughout, without the bleached ends standing out more profusely, especially if you're going to spin with them. That's just my thoughts on that. Now, dyeing roving, it will help you create different colour effects for spinning, and I feel that you have more control over that compared to what you do with your locks. You can get gradients, you can get, well, you're creating solid colours, and you're going to get more consistent, all depending if you use the right amount of water in your pot. If you're using a dye bath to add different colours on there, you can get different layerings of gradient colorways in there. Now with that, there's certain effects that you can't do, like speckling, and you can do speckling on your yarn, on your roving, but you might find you're going to lose that look. So if you want to do any type of speckling, I would leave that till afterwards, when you're making that roving into Rolex or into your bats, and add in your speckling effect, like your, let me see, it's always up here somewhere, isn't it? Like adding in woolly nets and that sort of thing, like these, to get your speckled effect. Or use mulberry silk thrum leftovers, just silk leftovers, Egyptian cotton, that sort of thing, to create that speckling effect on your finished product. Okay, now yarn, completely different topic altogether. You can do all of the above. You can do solid colours, semi-solid colours, you can do speckling, you can do reverse speckling, you can do solids with semi-solids with speckling on there, you can do gradient spinning yarns. There's also much more that you can do with it, even if it's blended. You're going to get better results. Now, as an alternative, you can actually just spin up your own wool, get a really good balance on there, and then with that you can then go forward and dye that wool, that yarn, as you would do a manufactured milled yarn. So I hope that answers your question. It's probably a bit more detailed than that, but I don't want to overface you with it. But those are the comparisons, and each one have all got their own reasons as to why you want to do that. You want to dye your locks because you want to spin locks, or you want to felt the locks and you want to dye them yourself. Your rovings, if you want to dye your rovings and create for fractal spinning, Barber Paul, or you just want a unique looking wool for spinning with. And when you're dyeing with your roving, and it's for breed, it's perfectly fine. But if you're dyeing with a fibre, a wool roving, I haven't got anything up here, a wool roving that's been blended with something, you need to take into account sometimes those fibres in there don't want to be dyed, like bamboo. Bamboo's a bit of a nightmare. It can be a bit of a swine. It doesn't really want to take acid dyes. Not to say that you won't see some colouring or staining. Another one, tencel, can be a bit of a pain to dye with as well for blending, but rovings with silks are brilliant. Rovings with Seacell, that will take a dye, but you've got to treat it differently. And you know how the other week there I did the dye pot Thursday and I added in a little bit of washing up liquid? Well, you can do that with your roving as well while it's soaking, especially if it's got a fibre in there that doesn't want to cling to the acid dye. Is always a good way, just to get a bit more dye to penetrate onto that fibre, and it'll just stick onto it. It doesn't penetrate it, it'll adhere to it, and the washing up liquid in the sink won't do any harm to your wool, but it will help create a a wool that the dye pigment can stick to, and it's the exact same process if you were using manufactured milled yarn as well. Right, Joan, question 2. Can you dye cashmere on its own? Right, so the answer is yes, okay, but then I've put, why would you want to? It's expensive. You can cashmere, and you've got Chinese cashmere, and you're looking at roughly in the UK for a 50-gram bag of just normal cashmere, a standard regular cashmere, you're looking roughly about 8-9 quid for 50 grams. Actually, might actually be more than that. You might be looking at least 10 quid or more. Then a Chinese cashmere, you're looking roughly, last time I bought some was nearly 16 quid, and I bought that for Christmas Advents. So it's very expensive. So my thought is, why? Why would you want to? Now, it felt really, really easily, so I wouldn't put it in my dye tray at all. If I wanted to dye a cashmere, I would personally blend it up into art bats with a wool that you like, and I would do a ratio of probably 80 to 20% cashmere, because of how expensive it is, but a lot goes a long way when you're blending with it. You feel the difference of it. If you've got any at home, try a 5% ratio, and then try a 10% ratio, try a 15% ratio, and then try a 20% ratio, and feel the difference in that bat, okay, or in your Rolags. So yeah, my alternative would be to do that, blend it up into a bat or into Rolags with an 80% wool to 20% cashmere ratio. Then I would spin that up, and then I would dye it, okay, because then you've got more control over that not felting, because it's already in your yarn. Alternatively, and I haven't ever tried it because I've got that, why would you want to? I like to use that as a natural thing, and if I'm doing that, I usually put it in one of my own naturel bats where I've not dyed it at all. I'm thinking Banbury dyeing or water bath. So you would get your dye and put that in a bowl of water, and get your cashmere and put that in with the water, get yourself some marigold gloves or something on, okay, and gently massage that to make sure all the acid dye gets into the fibre. And then from there I would put it in a jam jar or coffee jar, okay, then pour in the dye stock from the same bowl into there, add in a little bit of your citric acid. I suppose actually maybe vinegar might be best to use that because it's a lot more gentler. Add that into the jar, put the jar in a pot up to its shoulder of water with a lid on the top of it, right, and then just let it sit in a gentle heat, and eventually you will see that dye stock get clearer and clearer. You're looking at probably about an hour and a half, and then leave it to cool right down, and then rinse it off, and you shouldn't get much. But I think that's the most gentlest way to dye it if you really feel the need to do it. Now, if you're talking about a cashmere jumper that you've got at home, or a cashmere cardigan, or a scarf that you want to over dye, there's actually some videos on YouTube that you can use and go and watch. And I saw one the other week there just because Joan had asked us, and I thought, why would you want to? I thought, well, maybe she's got a jumper or something at home. So with that, you use a warm water bath. She used like one of those big plastic tubby tubs, and she got some Rit dye. You can get the bottles of it all pre-made up at your supermarket. You can buy them online. And she poured that into the water, and I think she used washing up liquid in there and a dash of salt, and put it in there. And you've got to constantly be mixing it and swirling it so that the water and the dye mix up and get right into that. And you want to pre-soak that jumper as well beforehand so it's wet when it goes in the bath. But yes, you can dye it, but I wouldn't do it myself unless it was in a yarn. So there's the answer to that one. Okay, question 3. Sandra said, what's the difference between using vinegar and citric acid in dyeing? Right, so what's the difference? There isn't any difference. She's going to get the same results. That's one answer, okay? Second answer, the cost, convenience. The convenience to get citric acid I've only ever seen it, and the shop's closed down now, for sale on the high street. It was in Wilko's, and Wilko's is closed now. It went bankrupt last year, as we're all crying our tears with the best paint in the world from Wilko's. I have seen it in Home Bargains in a little tub, which is great if you only do a little bit of dyeing now and again. And it's only about £1, I think it's 175 or something like that. It was for 200. Well, I was getting mine for 250 grams, but I buy mine online, a kilo of citric acid. It cost me about £5.50. So weigh it up. Vinegar, I always find, I don't know what's been going on, but the last couple of years, buying white vinegar seems to just all of a sudden not be on the shelves, or it'll be malt vinegar that you can't get on the shelf. Now you can actually use, and this is controversial, you can use, because it's citric acid, lemon juice. And I have used it before when I've been really, really desperate and had nothing else. And that worked because it is a natural citric acid, and that's what citric acid is made from, is dried out lemon juice. So you can use that. I've heard people say you can use apple cider vinegar as well. I don't think I've tried that. I might have done, but I can't remember. If I have, it's because I've been really desperate, because I couldn't get white vinegar out the shops, and I've looked to see what I've got in, and that's how I ended up getting onto using citric acid all the time. Secondly, so that's the price of it, the convenience of where you can buy it. Right, so the next thing is the smell. There is a smell when you use vinegar, white vinegar on wool. It's very, very stinky. It does stink out the house. Pardon me, I've got hiccups. It does stink out the house. So that to me is the factor that smell outweighs. There's no smell, there's no odour with citric acid, but you smell the wool, but there's no overall lingering smell like you get with vinegar. So if you don't mind that with the windows open, then go ahead and do it. I used to use vinegar for probably the first 2 years of dyeing my business. So there's nothing wrong with it. Now, there are two factors, and it's to do with the quality of your fibre afterwards. Vinegar is less harsh and corrosive in comparison to citric acid, okay? So it's a little bit gentler on your fibres. Hence I said the cashmere, and the other question, I would use vinegar as your mordant, though it isn't really a mordant. It's just a natural acid. And so is citric acid, really, at the end of the day. But it's not classed as a mordant, but it can be used, and it does the exact same job. So it's a little bit gentler. Vinegar's a bit more gentler on your fibres in comparison to citric acid, but I've never seen any difference. And if anything, when I was first starting out, probably down to the fact that I was maybe overheating my wool, it would come out scratchy. So that was one of the other reasons why I was never really that keen on vinegar in the first place. Now, there is a little bit of controversy to this as well. Me saying about scratchiness. Now, citric acid I use in everything, and I've dyed Stellina, but with using citric acid as my mordant for my acid on my fibres. But if you've got a yarn that has got Stellina in it that you've bought from a producer, okay, like the BFL Stellina blends, lace weights and all the rest of it, okay, if you're going to dye with that, don't use citric acid, use vinegar, because it is gentler. If you do a sample yourself at home, if you can afford to, you've got 2 skeins or 250 gram skeins that you split 100 grams in half. Get your citric acid in one dye bath and get your vinegar in the other dye bath, okay? And then see the difference of the effect it has on your Stellina. The citric acid, you'll see it dull down. You'll still see it's Stellina, but it dulls down. It actually partially disintegrates the metallic look on the Stellina. But if you dyed it with vinegar, because it's less harsh, it actually keeps the shine and sparkle of the Stellina. So there you go, a top tip. Use vinegar if you're dyeing yarn that's got Stellina in. Okay, I'm just seeing what else I've written down. Right, by reducing your acid level, so is less abrasive than a citric acid, but by reducing down your acid level from your citric acid usage compared to what you usually add to a dye bath may help with the overall sparkle on your Stellina. But I would still advise use vinegar. It says white or apple cider vinegar that I've written down in my notes, both will work the same. It's I've written down the equations as well. So vinegar, 1.5 cups of dye stock, okay, that's not the dye that you've got in there, just the dye stock made up, to 1 tablespoon of vinegar. Citric acid, 1.5 cups of dye stock to 2 teaspoons of citric acid. Okay, so try those comparisons yourself at home and see what you think. Okay, so this was question 4 now. So Alison and Andrea both asked, using cling film and a veggie steamer. Right, so it is something that I have tried. I don't like it. I don't like it. It's too messy. It's too messy. If I had a workshop, aka Phil's shed out the back, and converted that, and I had a proper workspace and not doing it all from inside my own kitchen, I maybe do it more often. But it's a very, very messy thing to do. I tried it in an old rice steamer, a veggie steamer, rice steamer, and yeah, I didn't like it at all. You can use the exact same method where you get the cling film and you put your dye stock in it and use your vinegar squirt. You remember the old sauce bottles that you could get with a spout at the top, and put your dye stock solution in there, have a bit more control, or paint it on with a sponge paintbrush that you can get out the kids' toy section or paint section. Use one of those for a bit more control over the top of it. You want to pre-wet your fibre as well, or your yarns that you're dyeing up, and then fill it up. But with that, you want your dye stock solution, it's got to have the acid already in there. Yeah, no, I don't like it. I don't like it. One alternative, you can actually buy online oven-proof cling film. You can do this in a microwave, and you can do it in the steam cooker, in your steamer, okay? But another alternative, if you've got an old stainless steel tray, prepare your yarns and your fibres with a little bit of water in the bottom of the tray like you would normally do. And like if I was going to do it on the oven hob, do it in my oven instead, and get this oven proof, heat proof cling film that you can actually buy, and put that over the top of your tray and put it in the oven and do it that way, so it's getting a steaming more than it is on top of the oven hob, if you don't want to use that. But yeah, it's not something I want to repeat. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. I find it more of a faff than doing how I do it. And I feel like I've got more control over what's going to happen as well. Didn't enjoy the process of that, so I won't be doing that again. I might do it as a demo for alternative methods to do it, but at the moment I don't have a steamer. I know people professionally dye using slow cookers as well. It's not something I've ever tried before, and I wouldn't want to, particularly. Microwave, steamer, slow cooker, or in the oven with heat proof cling film over the top of it are your alternatives. Another way to steam, you remember years ago your mum used to have those steam baskets that sit at the bottom of their hob pots, like your cooking pot, and they have a steamer rack at the bottom. You can use that if you've got any of those. You could find one out of an old charity shop and do the exact same method with the cling film and do it in there if you don't have access to a steamer or to a microwave. I don't have a microwave. Don't use them. Don't believe in them. I don't want radiocarbon thingies in my body. Thank you very much. Right, storage. And I think this was Alison again. So she's asked me about storage. So I wrote down fingers, toes and eyes crossed. It's not a problem I've ever had, is MOTHS. Never. Not to say that I don't get them in the house, because I do, but I don't have a problem. I never have done. But I do use storage boxes, especially for stuff that I don't want out and about all the time. I've got my little units over there. Come on, let's go for a wander. Okay, so I have my baskets about the place, and I have these little boxes there. I have this big box which I've just been rummaging through, which has got all my yarns in the bottom, with my hand spun yarns, my dyed yarns, and that there is a clip lock lid that goes over the top. So there's that one. Underneath there, no, there's no storage. There's lots of stuff. I've got lots of stuff in baskets, but they're all in plastic bags, so they're all separate, so I know what to grab when I need it. Excuse the state of my room. Then those storage boxes out of Calyx units, or that I've just picked out of B&M Bargains, I use those a lot as well. These ones here, these big boxes, they cost me £5.40, £5.50 from Home Bargains. That was before Phil worked there, and it's just a clip lock box. That's all my own dyed yarn, still in the bag, so I know which is which. And that's what I store my stuff, my everyday stuff that I need to get my hands on straight away. That box down there has got all my alpacas, cashmere, rose fibres, all that sort of stuff that's not been dyed. It's all in the bags, just waiting for me to use it. But that's all really I have for storage. Obviously, the shelves are all my stock, with all that up there. And then my yarns just hang around like nobody's business. I've got bits of rovings up there. But because I'm in here all the time and is always doing stuff and I'm always busy putting things around. And then I've got this pegboard that me and Phil made. I've got a bigger one over there. But I've got one from my sewing threads, which got little dowels sticking out the top just so my threads are out the way. And then I've got one from my bamboos and flaxes and braids that hang off the little dowel pegs on a board. And I've got another one over there that usually has the 3D printed stuff hanging on it. It's got my notice boards, and then I used to be absolutely covered in rovings, but I can't really get into that corner anymore. Then that's my box of bits that I just pull out whenever I need it. I've got more baskets up there with fibres that have been dyed, and then there's my everyday blending section. It's supposed to be colour coordinated. So I've got my purples over that side. I've got my pastels and nude colours in there, my unicorn mixes, oranges and reds and yellows, blues and greys, and greens and browns, and then that's an odds and sods bit. So yeah. So storage wise, yeah, the clip lock boxes are a brilliant thing to get. You can get yourself a couple of them, but the deep ones, don't go for the long wide ones because they just take up so much room. The deep ones, I find I can get quite a lot in there, and you can just sit on the top of it and clip it back into place, and they're practically airtight. Sheep's fleeces and stuff like that, when they come, I don't really do anything with them. I leave them in the bags that they came in to start with the hopes that there's no moth eggs inside them. But if there is, they're inside the bag, and I won't know until I open it up, or in the boxes or whatever. I only open them up when they come out. So storage wise, that's about it. I saved my plastic bags from my orders. But yeah, I'm lucky. I don't really have any problems with that sort of thing. But clip lock boxes, get yourself a couple of them, and that's definitely a good way. And they're neat and tidy, out the way. And you can put stuff, your TV or whatever on top of it if it's not something you go into all the time. I work in here, it's my studio, it's my workspace, so I'm always in here. If I'm not up here blending, I'm up here prepping fibres to dye, I'm up here packing orders, I'm on the computer, I'm on the 3D printer, I'm up here having live chats, so I'm always in the room. So if I was to ever see anything that shouldn't be in this room, usually a little black and white cat at the moment, who's been a bit of a nightmare, then I'm always around to sort stuff out and get rid of it. Will not say it. Right, so the next question is, oh yeah, and I was going to add as well, alternatively, if you haven't got anything but similar outlay to me and you haven't got a lot of money and you want to avoid that certain creature, mint essential oil, lavender essential oil, bay leaves, cloves, rosemary and thyme, and sandalwood as well. So if you want to make yourself up some felted balls and pop them in, it'll make you will smell nice, but they don't like them, and you're not got mothballs, and have you, if that's what you're worried about. Okay, question 6, Sandra, who makes the best acid dyes? Okay, so this is subjective, okay, but what I've done is written down a little list of the companies that I have used over the last 7-8 years, okay, and giving you my opinion on them. Right, so my very first wool dyes were from World of Wool, and at the time you could get a starter set of 6 colours, and was it 6 colours? It was the full set, the full range colours, and at that time it was only about 29 quid. I think it's about £40 now. And in that I got thermometer, a sort of like spatula spoon for taking the pigment out the pots. I got a collection of pots, I got some gloves, and I got instructions in there, and a couple of beakers I think as well for measuring out stock. But they use Urolano dyes. I like them. I really like them. My favourite colour from them is got to be grey. It does a really great true grey colour pigment when I'm dyeing with it. There's no undertones, no pinks coming out of it, there's no purpley undertones, and I'm not getting that bluey hue out of it neither, which comes out like slightly purple. I really love for clarity their grey dye. That's when I bought it years ago, and I've still got the original pots that I bought 7-8 years ago. And grey as well, and you'll discover later on down the line when we start going into that topic, dyeing. When you want to darken down a colour at home, a grey, a really good true grey, is your bonus card for darkening down some colour pigments to give you different shades and counterbalances on your colouring, on your dye stock. It's always worth a note. I'm always on the search for a really good grey, always. Right, so the next company that I bought from on my journey in dyeing was Landscape Dyes. And they use Craft Colour dyes. That's the name of the company that actually produced them. Or the pigment, that is. Now, they've got really great ornament. I was going to go back, and I actually wrote down as well for World of Wool price for their dye, which a small amount does go a really long way. Though, for a 10-gram jar, for £3.50, I think it's a bit expensive. Definitely a bit expensive for 10 grams, but you're getting a lot. You'll probably be able to dye about 1 kilo of yarn for that full lot, and that's if you use X amount, say 1 gram of dye pigment to say 250 grams of water to make a stock. Yeah, it can go a long way depending on when you use it and how much you use of it. And there's certain colours that you don't use a lot of, like greens. I'm one for greens, is not something I use a lot of, so I've always got a lot of it in unless it's a certain colour ratio. Right, so the next one is Landscape Dyes by Craft Colour. They've got some really bold abstract colours in there. These dyes are just perfect for starting out, and they were doing they did start doing, and they're moving at the moment, because you can get them from Wing and Wool is where I get my Craft Colours from, and my Landscape Dyes from, when I've bought them in the past. But they're in the middle of moving at the moment, so I'm not sure if you can still get them on their website at the moment, but you can get box packs of them with instructions in there and everything you need to do to get you started. Now, they're brilliant for starting out when you've never dyed before, because all you're paying for the dye with, it's got citric acid already mixed in with the dye pigment. So take that into consideration, that your citric acid is a little bit heavier than the actual weight of the pigment, okay? So I found that with some of the dyes that I was getting, I seemed to get more level in a tub than what I was for some other dyes, but then that might be down to the cost of the dyes, and I'll tell you about that in a minute when we get onto another company. So price-wise, I think it was expensive, because you're getting 20 grams of dye citric acid mix for £4. Okay, you can buy 100 grams of one colour for £11.50, and I think the colour sets that you can get are, I think there were boxes of 6, there might be boxes of 5, I can't remember, I've not looked for a while. And they're roughly about 30 odd quid. They were starting them off at £19, but I think they've put the price up of them, so it's somewhere around the back end of £20 up to 30 something, I think. Don't quote me on that, you'll have to go and have a look for yourself. But there's some really gorgeous colours in there that I really like, and I still have, from about 7 years ago, quite a few Landscape dyes that I haven't replaced. I still use every once in a blue moon, and the favourite colour from them was Sarsaparilla, which is like a really egocentric ultraviolet purple. What was my other favourite colour from there? Paw was a really nice one, and Wombat was another one as well. So there's all Australian names on there, but there's some really lovely colours in there, and you can get different listings, different groups of them. They do natural, sea and something else, and they're all picked out, but they're really good, decent quality for starting out with. I just now buy my own citric acid, and I don't see the point of paying out £4 for 20 grams of for dye pigment that's mixed with citric acid. Gay dyes you can get from the Threshing Barn. Theirs as well are mixed up with citric acid. So just take that into consideration if you want to start out but you don't want to pay it for other bits and pieces as well. Two alternatives to use that are already mixed with citric acid. But as a rule, really nice, good quality, and I quite like them. Now Ashford dyes I haven't used before, but I did see that, now this is expensive, for 10 grams of dye pigment, £6.50. If you want 50 grams of dye pigment, it's £17. That's extortionate. That is absolutely outrageous, but I'm wondering whether that's because they come from Australia. Now you can get them from, I think, from Wing and Wool. Adelaide Walker used to do them, but I couldn't find them on their website the other week when I went looking. I'm not sure who, right, so Adelaide Walker was another dye producer that I buy from, and I love their olive. I have no idea who they get their dye pigment from. Obviously it's just their label, and they don't mill it themselves, they get it from somebody, so I'm not sure who it is. But when I've looked at the Ashford dyes on Wing and Wool and then looked at the same colour pictures on Adelaide Walker, they look very similar. So maybe, I'm not sure, but they don't declare it, and you're supposed to. So I like their black. Their black's a really true black. I love their olive and their violet and their purple colours and the cyan blue. Really nice, really bold colours, and really, really good. And you don't need a lot of their dye neither. And it's not badly priced. They've put the price up now. They never used to be. I think they used to be £3.75 when the last time I bought from them, but they've put up to £4 for 25 grams, which is not bad. It isn't bad at all. Now, so all of them I like respectively, and if I couldn't find a colour, or if I knew that I wanted them like olive, I would go and buy, when my olive dye runs out, I will go back and buy that olive from Adelaide Walker because I like that olive dye. And probably get another one of their purple and another one of their violet. I've probably got a similar dye colour downstairs, but you know what it's like when you're like, yeah, that's not the same. It's like a coloured pen. It might be the exact same coloured pigment in there, but it comes out looking different. So next, Dharma dyes. These are now, obviously you're aware, are my main stock. These are the ones I'm using, and I'm still trying to build up my colour collection of them. But I would say I'm nearly at half on the acid dyes. It took me years to source a supplier in the UK, and I found a Dharma dyes supplier back in 2020, and it was Dina's Home of Crafts down in Birmingham. She's now got a bricks and mortar shop, but she never used to. So now Dharma dyes, some of the colours split, and it can be a bit frustrating. But then sometimes it's quite nice, especially if I'm dyeing locks and I want it to be all a little bit wishy-washy and have different colours. Then I don't mind that. I don't mind that at all. Lichen splits, the chocolate brown one splits, tobacco splits. Sometimes some of the colours says they're going to be a certain colour on the colour chart, and they're not quite that when you dye them. Or if you go to buy another, say, one recently for me was golden wheat. Golden wheat, that I bought that when I first got the dyes back in 2020, and I had to replace the pot. When I replaced the pot with a new one, right, new stock, it wasn't the same colourway. It came out looking more green than it did yellow. So now that's nothing to do with Dina's Home and Crafts. That's to do with the supplier. That's to do with Dharma's dyes. And whatever goes on in their process in their factory, they mustn't be keeping a note of what exactly is being used, or they're not confirming the pigment mixes that go inside their dyes. So sometimes now and again, a different batch you'll get a slightly different colourway, and it won't be what you thought it was, and they don't update the colour charts to let you know. Some of the dyes that you'll get will be quite pure and they'll be really, really powdery. Some dyes that you get from them look like they've got like a undertone in the pigment, but that's obviously down to the way that it's been milled together and the colours have been combined. Some of the dyes, as I showed in my video the other week there, sage leaf's one of them, and so is pistachio green. When they go in the water, they fizz. There's something white inside the actual dye powder, so I don't know what it is, but you get that reaction from it. But saying all that, I wouldn't go back and I wouldn't go to a different supplier at all. Now, the prices vary with acid dyes from Dharma Dyes, which is great because some of the pots, now I get 50 grams, that's the lowest weight you can get. You get 50 or you can get 100 grams of any of the colours, okay? And the price range is from £3.19 for 50 grams, or up to, I think it's £13 for 50 grams. For 50 grams, but the price will vary. I can get a dye, so I think a black one, and it'll cost me about £3.66 for 50 grams. But then I'll go and order a scarlet, and that might cost me £4.19. Then you'll get a true turquoise, and that will cost me about £6.72 because turquoise is actually, I think, if I remember rightly, and I'll have to look into this, I'm sure it's made from an actual mineral. And then red, is the magenta, is actually made from the beetles. So there was a couple of years ago, I think it was during COVID, that they thought they were going to run out of supplies for making dye, acid dye, turquoise for milling with, and the suppliers, they were starting to really panic because they didn't think they'd be able to get any and recover from it, because the dye stocks weren't getting transported around the world as pigment that they need for making turquoise. But less is more with those two, because honestly they're beasts. They stain everything, they get everywhere, and they take forever to evaporate in the water or saturate through. So yeah, so Dharma dyes, citric acid, each colourway's got different price ranges. I think there's two on there that are at least 10 quid or more, but I haven't bought them yet because that means that I can't get two dyes. So reflective, isn't it? Now they do a really lovely range of standard cold water fibre dyes as well, in the Procyon cold water dyes. Lovely mixed colourway that you can get a hold of in the cold water dyes. And again, I've never used them. I don't dye cottons or anything like that for warps or for yarns like a lot of people do, and I find Procyon cold water dyeing really, really messy. I have tried it, and it's far too messy, and I think it's overcomplicated. Some people just love that method. I am not one of those. I don't like it. It's far too messy. It's too much of a fuss to do. And I'm quite happy to stick with my citric dyes. And if I can't dye a plant-based fibre, fine. I can't dye it. So yeah, there's as well the Procyon fibre dyes, the reactive dyes, are range between £2.77. I think that was for a yellow, for 50 grams, up to round about £6 something. Okay, depending on what colour pigment it is and how rare it is and how expensive it is. They all have the different ranges, but there's a whole selection on there that you can use. Also, right, so there's a new selection that you can get on in Dharma. These are really concentrated. They're called Dharma Set dyes. Okay, very concentrated. It was one of the dyes that I showed you the other week there on my video. It was I think it's Grey D or Grey G, and that's a Dharma Set dye. It's very concentrated, really needs some decent temperatures, and I'll read what it says because I went and looked up on it for you. Okay, it's a more permanent dye compared to regular acid dyes, and it's wash fast, so you can put it in the washing machine. So if you're using a superwash wool, so it works really well. It doesn't fade in hot water, so it's perfect match to your superwash wools and yarns that you can buy. Very concentrated. It's got a metal complex in it, so it's a 1:2 ratio acid to reactive dye that's mixed through there. They don't bleed once they're set neither, so it's great for wet felting. So if you like to dye your own wools, go and look for the Darmoset dyes, okay? It doesn't wet felt when you're using the hot water in that process. The cons, when the dye bath gets to its optimum temperature, the dye will strike really, really fast. So what I've done to overact that, especially if I'm wanting a solid, so like a solid grey, which I did the other week there, I did a solid grey in a dye bath. And what I did is I put the Darmoset dye in the dye bath in a lukewarm water, then I added in my Roving to go with it and saturated it down and pushed it right into it and made sure it was all completely covered, and then brought that cold temperature up to a simmer to bring the heat up. And that way I found that I got a really good saturation of colourway. If I was to put that straight into a warm water bath and put my dye stock in, it's going to hit it straight away because it's already at the temperature it needs. So if you're going to be dyeing Rovings or even a super wash yarn, I would let it sit there in the dye bath with the stock, with your Darmoset dye in the bath with your yarn or your wool, and let it sit there and soak and penetrate it. If you're going to be doing half semi-solid and you want to do speckling on your yarn, i.e. you've got your yarn, say, twisted up just round, okay, or braided, and you've only got, say, like a centimetre in your dye bath, or a centimetre and a half, enough just to cover the bottom half of your yarn once it's all bulked up and twisted up or braided. Put your dye stock solution in the bottom of that, sit it on the bottom with your acid dye as well, and let it penetrate and soak in, okay? That way you're letting that dye soak into that fibre before you've got any heat in there. Then bring up your heat and then do your speckling effect or whatever it is that you want to do with it. That's my solution. That's how I found working with it, and I found it easier to control if I brought the heat up with it already in situ. So the Darmoset dyes, 50 grams, you're looking at between £4.81 up to £6.80. Right, so there's another one as well, and I have used her dyes. She's got some lovely neon dyes, and it's Sophie Crafts. Siobhan Crafts, okay? We all know who she is. She's down in Warrington. She uses Kaleidoscope yarns for her dyes. Really lovely collection of really fluorescent dyes, and I can get fluorescent dyes with Dharma dye as well, forgot to mention. And she's got a lovely collection. She uses Kaleidoscope dyes as her dye pigments that she sells. I would say that probably just as good as Dharma dye selection. The only thing is with the chocolate colour, it splits, which I think is very similar to the Teddy Bear Brown. That splits for me. But it gives you lovely dusky pinky undertones. Really, really pretty. Very, very sweet. She's charging £3.50 for 20 grams in a pot, or £10 for 100 grams. Really budget friendly, really great colour mixing. Pick them up. She's got a pretty decent little range. I think she's got about 12, maybe 14 colours. A lot of them are neon dyes, neon reflective, black light and glow in the dark. Definitely go and give her a shout and support a fellow dyer and fibre artist. Right, so I'm going to go and pop off and get myself a cup of coffee, and I've got 2 more questions to answer. We'll be back in a bit. Fresh coffee in hand and 2 dogs. Yeah, that quiet didn't last long, did it? Right, so the second to last question we've got is number 7, and that's from Victoria, and she asked, how long do you set your dyes on fibre and yarn with heat? Now, it's quite a subjective question, that, to be fair, because it's all dependent on different factors. Factors as in, right, you need to stop that now and stop being naughty. It wouldn't be a video without telling a dog off, would it? Stop it. Right, I'm just going to read because I can't concentrate. Right, so it's all dependent on the fibre, different factors. If it's a superwashed wool, I will soak that roving or the yarn in the dye bath if I want to get a complete solid, especially if I want a solid colour or a semi-solid colour on my wool. And then I will bring that up from a lukewarm, because the water's lukewarm when I've put the dye stock in and everything else and melted down the citric acid, and I'll bring that heat up to the dye with the yarn in there, and then that'll help it penetrate the fibres and saturate away. Then again, it's all dependent on the saturation. Once the dye bath water is clear, then I remove that. With dyes such as fuchsia and turquoise, less is more with your dye pigment. I use very little pigment in the stock and heat until it's saturated. If I want a bolder colour of these, then I use the same amount of water again once it starts to look like the colour's fading in the water, and then add a bit more of the same amount. So like, say for example, I used 100 millilitres of water in a little tub with half a gram of dye pigment in that to make the dye stock, and then I'll add in what I need just to help swirl that around and get that darker colour. In a second, where am I at? Dye in the bath, and be careful because the wool and fibre will only take in as much dye stock as its staple. The fibres will, the fibres dimension will allow it. If you want a strong bold colour, then you need to think about what you're dyeing, because some breeds create bold striking colours and some give you dusky hues. Now for example, I'll show you this. Okay, so this wool here I dyed up, and it is 100% merino. It's got nothing added to it. Now it was in a really quite a decent strong dye bath, but I have got areas where it's given me this like mottled semi-solid colour, or what I think looks like a stone wash colour, you know, the old stone wash jeans you used to get in the 80s. Okay, so I could have done it on another second bath, but then I could have been risking making my wool lose its softness by over dyeing it, and then I've ended up probably with a load of water with still a dye stock in there that I've got to try and get rid of. Okay, other wools, hold a sec, I've got another one in here. This one's not mine, but this is a merino nylon blend. Okay, it's one of the yarns I'm using on my jumper at the moment. It's from Boscastle Yarns, and again you can see that it is a solid colour, but there's areas where it's not quite had enough dye stock in the water and it's not penetrated, or it's not been moved around. Sometimes when you're dyeing a solid colour, you want more water in your dye bath. That's why I use my big pot. If I want to dye a wool in a solid colour, I'll use my big 10-litre pot, and I'll fill it at least halfway just for one skein of wool, or even two at a push. But I would lift up the water a little bit more if that was the case, because you want the water and the dye stock to be able to penetrate inside those fibres. You want them to float around and breathe a little bit. Okay, so what I do when I'm doing solid roving is I'll put in 100 grams in my 5 litres of dye stock with the acid in there, and let it just permeate through all the fibres so it gets right in there and you're not left with any bits. If you dye your wool in a dye bath tray, like a roasting tray, because they're sat down on the base of it, the water will float above the top of it more than it will float underneath it. So even though you can swill it around and let the water penetrate into it, sometimes you haven't got the space in that dye pot to be able to allow that water to get in and around it. So you want to lift up the level of water if you want a solid colour on your yarns. But as I say, your breeds can be make different things in. That's merino, and that's 100% merino, okay, and that's a merino nylon. So because that's got nylon in, it's actually held onto the colour a lot more bolder than this one has. And if I didn't know any better, I'd have said that looks like a blue-faced Leicester yarn, because of the way that it looks all mottled, because that's what blue-faced Leicester gives a dusky hue when it's dyed. So it's all subjective. It's all down to how much citric acid you've got in your dye bath, how much dye pigment you use in your dye stock, how much yarn you're using in your dye tray, or your fibre that you're using in your dye pot. Sometimes if you have too much in there, it doesn't get the dye. You haven't added enough dye or water-based bath in there to help it get to the areas you want to, and it only attacks certain spots and not all the way through. So it's subjective. Superwash wools, superwash treated wools strikes really quickly with the dye. So if you've got superwash merino, you can get superwash blueface Leicester now as well. And because of the way that they've been treated, it's like a chemical process that they go through so that you can actually use it in the washing machine. I find them really quite tricky to work with for dyeing. That's definitely one that if I wanted to solve the colourway, I'd do it in a large pot. If I want to do a gradated yarn colourway with it, I would probably still do it in a solid pot where you just take a section of it, fill up your dye stock in the pot, and then put in a section of that roving, let it sit in the dye pot and swirl around, and then I lift that up and you take another piece out, another section, and lift it through if you want to do it all in one roving. That's how I do it. I have a roasting tray at the side of my big pot and it sits in there soaked, ready for me to use, and I just dip in a certain section, lift it out, pull the other section through and dip that into the next colour that I want to add in that dye pot. So that's how I do it, so that I know that the dye stock can penetrate to get a better solid colour on my wool. And I'm trying to think, what have I got? I have got something here as well to show you an example. My chair's in the way. Right, there's this one, and that one, or is it that one? Right, so this wool has been done, used my big stock pot where I've just lifted and tilted the fibre into the water, and I've ended up with a bit more solid colour throughout there, and you can see where the bleeding or the breaking up of the dye pigments happened. Now and again, if you're too quick or you've not got enough dye in the water, it won't strike all the way through. This one here has been done in a dye bath in the tray, and you can see there's a lot more mottled areas. The dye hasn't got all the way through into that, and you get a lot of colour bleeding through different sections. Okay, so you're asking, really, for me, how long's a piece of string? It's subjective. It is all dependent on your citric acid, the type of dye you're using, how strong is that dye in the first place? Is it a turquoise you're working with? Is it a fuchsia you're working with? Are you using a dye that has those as a basis and it seems to take forever to actually dissolve and saturate into your fibres? You need to think of all those things. But on essence, I spend about 15-20 minutes dyeing up per dye bath or per pot. That's it. Takes me a morning or an afternoon to get about a kilo's worth of wool all dyed up. Some of the fibres, dyes that I'm using are really quite muted and strike really quickly. Some of the dyes take a little bit longer, and I would advise you to then if you feel like it's taking a bit longer to saturate, add a little bit more, half of what you would normally do, citric acid or vinegar, into that dye bath, and that might help bring that out. If you are left with any dye in your pan afterwards, once you've taken the roving out, you do a little test and get your spoon. If the water's looking quite transparent and clear, or when you lift up that roving it looks like it's clear with the tiniest little inkling of colour, you're good to go. Okay, you could add in a little bit of extra citric acid or a little bit of vinegar. Alternatively, you can leave that tray in off the heat and let it do its thing, and see if that soaks up any more. But yeah, I would say about 20 minutes. Time varies at the end of the day, and anywhere from 7 to 30 minutes I've written in here. Other breeds take on lots of dye but will give a dusky shade, such as Blueface Leicester, 100% merino like I've just explained then. Blended wools can also be a factor in how you pre-soak and treat for dyeing afterwards as to how the wool's going to take up the dye. So the scale factors and dye stock solution strength, the amount of wool dyeing in the pot batch you're dyeing, 200 or 300 grams in one pot compared to dyeing up 100 grams. That's all going to factor into how quickly that dye stock solution disintegrates into your wool. The chemical formula that's in your tap might actually have an effect on how your wools dye up as well. It's citric acid or vinegar that you're using, add more if you've got a stubborn dye. So there you go. Your time range varies from the above factors, and they're subjective to the world, the dye stock, the mordant, the water temperature. So anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes once it taps up. I've written down here, bleeding, reduce your dye pigment, or as I mentioned, use a stock pot and add your acid dye and dye the fibre and bring the fibre up to the dye stock up to the heat. And then it should be clear or near to clear, and then rinse in hand hot water. And then I rarely get any bleeding, if at all, afterwards. I've never been told that my wools bleed once people set their yarns afterwards. Oh yeah, and that was another one you asked as well. Do I weigh out my dye? No, I don't. No, I don't. As I've shown you before on one of my videos, I have dedicated measuring spoons, usual domestic measuring spoons. They're dedicated to me just dyeing with. Once is a pinch, once is a snip, and once is a dash. Okay, and they're all different measurements. And I think one, you'll be lucky if it's like 1/2 gram, the smallest one. You're lucky if it's even 1/2 gram. Not probably even 1/4 gram. And those are the ones that I use. And because I'm used to that way of measuring, I don't feel like I need to use. If I want to make a dye stock solution up of one colourway and store it away in a jar with a lid on it, I would say use my larger spoon, which is probably the equivalent to about 1/2 gram or just over 1/2 gram of dye pigment, and I would add that to, I don't know, 250 mils of water in the dye jar. Mix it up, make sure it's all completely dissipated. I'll do it in warm water as well, and then that I've got a dye stock solution from that. And every time I go to use that, I would use one of those plastic syringes, and if I wanted to water it down, I would add that ratio then to the water, 100 mils of water or whatever. We'll get into that later on down the line, but yeah, there's different ways of being able to control it and having the exact same colourway all the time. But I know your answer is no, I don't weigh it out. You can get little digital scales that are for measuring out powder. I do have a set here, but I have moved this room around 4 times, decorated my living room 3 times, moved the kitchen around 4 times, and moved from downstairs to upstairs since I last saw those little tiny digital weighing scales for powder. So the odds of me finding them are slim to none. Yeah, so that's what that's all I can really answer on that. Now, the last question from Hilly, and she asked me, what's your favourite fibre to spin with and why? Now, Phil says the answer I'm going to give is a cop-out. Because it's not really an answer. But, as you all know, I rarely get the time to actually sit and spin. I don't buy stock in for myself, and when I have done, I've had to use it because I've needed stock to dye up for the following week's listings. So, as a rule, I like them all for different reasons. If I have to pick one to spin with, I quite like the Punta Aneris at the moment, but I haven't spun any fibre into yarn for a project, I would say, for about 2 and a bit years since I managed to do that. I've done it for weaving with, so I suppose that's different, and that was a merino flax and silk, just a silk blend, and I love that. I love that one, and I love soya, merino and soya fibre blended together. I like the Shetland and the silk blended together, but then this is my job, so I like them for all different reasons. For dyeing with, for spinning with, for blending with, and how I can blend stuff together, what it looks like when it's dyed up afterwards. But I can't have a favourite, they're all my children. I can like them for the unique different characteristics. That's what I say to my 3 kids. I love you all equally, but each one of you got your own little traits that I prefer more than the others. And that's the same with wool. So I can't really answer it until I actually retire from doing Woolly Cottage and actually get round to spinning up some stuff for myself. Favourite fleeces that I've ever bought has got to be Wissant. Though I'm partial to Surrey alpaca, so if you've ever got any and you don't want it anymore, pass it on to me, I'll have it. I like Surrey Alpaca as a blanket, or a raw process from beginning to end. And I like Wison as well. That's gorgeous little fibre. It's really, really soft and fluffy, and it's lovely. But yeah, so subjective again. I love them all. They're my children and I work with them every day, but I can't pick a favourite. So I hope you enjoyed this Q&A for this month. Watch out for Little Sheepy turning up for February into March Q&A in a couple of weeks' time. Yeah, and don't forget to cast your vote on Wednesday for what colourway story back teller that we're doing for Die Pot Thursday next Thursday, and that video will go on next Sunday. So thanks very much for watching. Any other questions or queries, write them down, and then I will ask you for them in a couple of weeks' time. Take care of yourselves, be good, be careful, and I'll speak to you soon.